If you're looking in your book, if you turn to page 11 in the Baptist Confession of Faith book that you have, page 11, I'll be starting in 5.4. We covered the first half of divine providence last week. If you were not here, you might get lost a little. I'm going to be kind of reviewing as I go along, but not totally. And if you do get lost and you do have questions, we're going to have a question and answer time at the end. Feel free to ask, and if we don't cover it then, come up afterwards, and I'll try to bring you up to speed. I don't want you to be lost, because last week we covered, God being the original cause, which was the first cause, man's will being second cause. And so if you don't have a good foundation of that, you might get a little bit lost as we go along, but I'll try to bring you along with us. So actually what we're talking about today is the mystery surrounding providence. And we're going to be starting, like I said, in 5.4. But as I did last week, if you'll look at your handout, I have two verses that I want to start with that I think really explains and gives a good foundation of what I'm talking about. Does everybody have a book? If you don't have a book, right over there on the front corner of the bar is a book, and they're free. Just feel free to grab you one if you don't have one. And the first verse that I brought up was Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. That is on your sheet. It says, and this is God speaking, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts." So God is telling us right off the bat, you are not going to think like I think. My thoughts are not your thoughts. You're not going to understand everything. That doesn't mean we're going to understand nothing. But there's going to be a lot of things we're not going to understand. It's going to be a mystery. And a lot of that deals with the decree and deals with providence, which is God's providence is him exercising, carrying out his decree that he made before the foundation of the world. He goes on to say, "Neither are your ways my ways." So he's not going to operate like we think he should, or like we think we want to, or we would. So he's telling us there, your thoughts are not my thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Not that he never will, but there's going to be a lot of things we don't understand about his attributes. And if you remember, I'm going to get there in just a second. The second verse is Hebrews 6:17. "So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose." And if you remember last week we talked about this. This is him being immutable. God does not change. He cannot change. If he changed, he wouldn't be God. He isn't going to change his mind. He isn't going to change the way he does things. He's not going to change on the promises that he made. Like I said, if he did, he wouldn't be God. You couldn't have faith in something that changes. And he goes on to say, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope that is set before us. We have this as an assurance, as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. These two things, God is immutable. He does not change. God is infallible. He does not lie. He cannot make a mistake. That is our sure and steadfast anchor for the soul. And that's important. That's important for our faith, that we have an anchor that we can hold on to, that our faith is based on. And that's what he's saying. Nothing in all this vast universe can come to pass from what God has eternally declared. We talked about that last week. Jeremiah talked about it when he talked about God's eternal decree. God, who cannot change or lie, is ruling the world according to his own good pleasure for his own eternal glory. That's the whole purpose. It's for his pleasure. It is for his glory. But the main issue, there's a main issue here. There's a main stumbling block for us humans. And there's a subject that puts blinders on most people's eyes. It put blinders on my eyes. And that's the subject of predestination or foreordination. That God has decided things by his eternal decree. And he's going to carry that out. And this affects the two bad words, man's free will. See, man, I thought I had free will. I'm going to make a decision. I was part of this, God. I chose you. You put all this out in front of me, and I said, yeah, I'm going to accept you. And I'm going to say this prayer. And that was my main stumbling block, is I thought it was a lot about me and what I did and what I could accomplish and what I could believe. And I couldn't get past the thought that God needed my help to save me. And that's kind of what it boils down to. When you say that it's my decision, that I'm going to accept God, he's saying, I need your help in you accepting me. And that's not the way it is. See, free will is not referred to, and this is on your sheet to be put in. Free will is not what is referred to as acting as a free and responsible agent. And that's often called free agency. They're not the same thing. And we talked last week, remember I made the statement, there's only one being that has free will, and that's God. He is controlled by nothing. He has no influences on him, no nature stamped on him that he has to operate by. He is free to do as he pleases. We are not. So, one, free will is saying that nothing is predetermined, foreordained, predestined, chosen, or decreed beforehand. And I am totally independent to make my own choices. Nothing affects me. There's nothing that's controlling my decisions. The other is that God has decreed and made certain the actual course of events which takes place in the life of every person. And we talked last week, and we'll talk a bit this week about how he accomplishes that without destroying our free agency. Okay? God's the first what? Huh? The original cause, that's right. God is the first cause. And he causes all these different things, where we're born, the nature that's been stamped on us at birth, who our parents are, where we live, where we go to school. All these things have been determined, and that affects the decisions we make. And they work together in harmony, because then the second cause, or the effect from the first cause, is our will, the decisions that we make. Okay, Romans 11:36. We can confidently affirm this when we totally believe in God's providence. For from him, from God, and through him, and to him are all things. And there's that three-letter word again, all. All things. To him be glory forever. So the bottom line is God has ordained that humans keep their liberty under his sovereignty. Now I want to go back and quote from this London Confession of Faith, Baptist Confession of Faith, in 3.1. And it talked about this matter, and Jeremiah talked about it. It said, yet God did this in such a way that he is neither the author of sin, nor has fellowship with any in their sin. This decree does not violate the will of the creature or take away the free working or contingency of second causes, which we talked about. Second causes is our will, the decisions that we make. His decree, what he has decreed before the foundation of the earth, is the primary cause. What he has declared is going to happen, and man's will is the secondary cause. And the two work together in harmony for his ordained outcome, what he has determined. Now, how that exactly works in harmony is one of those mysteries I talked about last week. So this week, we're going to tackle the place of sin and how God deals with his people and how God deals with his enemies. That's going to be the three main paragraphs that we're going to cover. So let's get started in 5.4. That's on page 11. And this is the mystery of providence, the place of sin. It states, the almighty power, unsearchable wisdom, and infinite goodness of God are so thoroughly demonstrated in his providence that his sovereign plan includes even the first fall and other sinful actions of both angels and humans. Even the first fall, of course that's Adam, and the other sinful actions of both angels, no, I'm sorry, I missed a word. Every other sinful actions of both angels and humans. God's providence over sinful actions does not occur by simple permission. And we'll talk about that. Instead, God most wisely and powerfully limits and in other ways arranges and governs sinful actions. Through a complex arrangements of methods or means, he governs sinful actions to accomplish his perfect and holy purpose. Yet, he does it in such a way that the sinfulness of their acts arise only from the creatures and not from God. Because God is altogether holy and righteous, he can neither originate nor approve of sin. Okay? A lot of words there, and we're going to kind of break it down as we go along. And basically, what this paragraph is addressing is the place of sin in relation to divine providence. What place does it hold? How does God use sin for his purposes? How do we account for the presence of sin and evil in God's creation? I mean, and once again, as we've seen with the other paragraphs we've covered, the authors of this begin with God's virtues, and he modifies them, which they often do. He talks about his almighty power and how infinite it is. His unsearchable wisdom, it's infinite and perfect. His goodness is infinite. And they're claiming that these attributes of God are evident or demonstrated or manifested through his providence, just like creation. And that's what we talked about. We walk out in the morning and you see the wonders of nature and how beautiful it is, the sunrise and stuff, and it declares the glory of God. Well, so does his providence, how he's working everything out. And the authors give us the reason why they're pointing these things out. It says that his sovereign plan includes even the first fall and every other sinful action, both of angels and humans. So they talk first about these wonderful attributes, that they're infinite. There's no limit whatsoever to them. And the reason that they tell you this is so we can have some kind of understanding that his sovereign plan accounted for sin, even the first fall. And the bottom line is sin wasn't an accident. It was in his decree. And so how many sinful acts are they talking about here? I gave a clue. 3-letter word. All sinful acts. And it tells us this word that his providence over sinful actions does not occur by simple permission. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't occur by permission. It's just not a simple arrangement, is what they're talking about. Instead, God most wisely and powerfully limits, another way, arranges and governs sinful actions. And it's a complex arrangement, it tells us. He does it in such a way, I know I'm repeating myself, that the sinfulness of their acts arise only from the creature. It's our nature. It's in our nature and not from God. So actually, I think the best place to start for us to have an understanding of what he's talking about here is kind of start in reverse. Why in this world did God create a being capable of sinning? Why did he do it? Why didn't he just create us so we wouldn't sin? Well, of course, a creature without the double capacity of doing good and evil would be a machine, right? If we could only do good, then everybody would love God. And that would be a false love. It would be an automatic love. He would actually have created us to love him. And that is not going to put his glory on display. I'm going to explain further. God was pleased to permit our first parents to fall, to sin, and then overrule their sin for his own glory. His permission and overruling of sin does not make him the author of sin. Are y'all confused? I got a quote for y'all to think about. It is on your handout. It's on your sheet there. It's right under 5.4. It seems that God has permitted the fall in order to show what free will would do. You get that? Adam, he had the capacity to sin, but he didn't have the sin nature. He had the ability to sin, but he wasn't born with a sin nature like we are. And so one thing God was showing is if you had free will, what would you do? You would sin. And then by overruling it, he has shown what a blessing of his grace and the judgments of his justice can do. So look at what he's put on display. By creating beings that can sin, he's showing what free will would do, and then what the blessing of his grace and the judgments of his justice can do. He's shown what two of his most major attributes can do. Romans 5:20. Now the law came in to increase the trespass, but where sin increased, where there was sin and it increased, grace abounded all the more. If there was no sin, if we didn't have the capacity to sin, there wouldn't be a need for grace or mercy, right? All we'd be doing is good. So that as a sign, as sin reigned in death, grace might reign through righteousness, leading to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. He gave the need of Jesus Christ. His justice is on display. His mercy is on display. His grace is on display. See, sin is permitted in order that grace and mercy may be shown in its forgiveness, and his justice can be shown in its punishment. He puts it on display, his glory on display. God's decree was designed to put his glory on display. God's decree was designed to put his glory on display through his mercy, his grace, his forgiveness, along with his justice. So this brings us, I think, to the next question in this order. Does this make God the author of sin? Well, as Paul says, may it never be. The answer is no, it doesn't. You know, we're finite beings. And it's not ours to totally understand how God in his secret counsel rules and overrules the acts of sinful man. But we can and should know that he never steps aside from his own perfect justice, his own perfect attributes. He does not author sin. He permits sin. And this brings us to truth. It's on the slide. In all manifestations of God's character, he shows himself as preeminently the Holy One. The Holy One. And John 1:15 tells us this. I think that's the slide. Do we have that one on there? John 1:15. There it is. This is the message that we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. No sin at all. He cannot author sin. There's no sin in him at all. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Oops. That is my bad. It is 1 John. So this is also on the sheet. I have a couple of quotes after that. If you'll look at that while I read it, I think this really explains it pretty good. It says, so God does not author sin, nor does he lay compulsion on the person to sin. So he's not making him sin. The person is simply left to the free exercise of his own nature. That's using your own sin nature. And he alone is responsible. This is not bare or simple permission. God, knowing man's tendency to sin, places on him or allows him to be in a certain environment. This is the first causes, knowing perfectly well that the sin will be permitted. While God permits it, his connection with it is purely negative, not positive. He just allows him to be in a position to sin. He's not making him sin. It's his sin nature, our sin nature, that is providing that impetus to sin. The motive which God has in permitting it and the motive man has in committing it are radically different. Many people are deceived in this matter because they fail to consider, and this is a slide, this is for you to fill in, God wills righteously those things which man do wickedly. First cause, man wills righteously those things which man do wickedly. And the gold standard verse for this, as many of you probably know, is Joseph. When he was confronting his brothers in Egypt after his brothers had tried to kill him and ended up putting him into slavery into Egypt. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me. They committed the evil, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And one of the facts we need to understand, have you ever sinned and then turned around and said, God, why did you do that? Why did you make me do that? No, typically we go, oh my, I sinned. It's our conscience telling us that we sinned and that we're alone responsible, not the Lord. It says, God most wisely and powerfully limits and in other ways arranges and governs sinful actions. It's the first original cause and second cause. And if it wasn't for this fact of the statement, in all cases, to get this, in all cases, man's sinful nature would go to the extreme. If God did not govern and arrange and limit, which it says in the London Confession of Faith, man's sinful nature would go to the extreme. There would be no restraint. Nathan has preached on that before. It would be horrible if he didn't have some kind of restraining ability in sin. But God sets boundaries. He sets limits to ensure what and how much will come to pass. And 4, if I can remember them, of God's restraints is 1, the family, our government, the church, our conscience. And those aren't the only things, but those are 4 of the big things that help limit sin in us and around us. So as we move on to the next paragraph, 5.5, and then 5.6, they're kind of together. We have an account of how God works through his providence with 2 different classes of people. Okay? His own children, which is the elect, is in 5.5. Those are the ones he's adopted. And then in 5.6, we're going to see how he works through his providence through his enemies, our sinful people who are lost. Now, I want us to note one thing as we go through this, okay? Because there's a similarity with the way that he works through his people, the elect, and what they call wicked, sinless, ungodly people. The afflictions or chastisement of the faithful are not punishments for sin. They're not punishments for sin, but only chastisements of a loving Father. If you were here when I was preaching on the great I am statements, the very last one, Jesus talks about pruning. And that's what chastisement is. God is pruning you to bring out more fruit that he talks about. The punishments of the wicked and the chastisements of the godly can appear the same. They can look exactly the same when you get to thinking about it, but there's a great difference in them. And one of the great differences is the motive behind them. One is from a loving Father, or when he chastises us or when he prunes us. But on the wicked, it's judgment from a just judge. And there's also a different outcome for chastisement and punishment. We're going to talk about these different outcomes that God desires from both of them. So with 5.5, we have the mystery of providence, God's way with his people. It says, the perfectly wise, righteous, and gracious God, there they go again, talking about God's attribute, how it's perfect, allows his own children for a time to experience a variety of temptations and the sinfulness of their own hearts. He does this to chastise them for their former sins or to make them aware of the hidden strength of the corruption and deceitfulness of their hearts so that they may be humbled. He also does this to lead them to a closer and more consistent dependence on him to sustain them, to make them more cautious about all future circumstances that may lead to sin, and for other just and holy purposes. So whatever happens to any of his elect happens by his appointment or his glory and for their good. So it's a big thing about why God allows us to go through trials and tribulations. Chastisement is what they're calling us. And we're told here that God often allows his own children for a time to experience a variety of temptations and the sinfulness of their hearts. And the first thing I want to talk about in that sentence is temptations. What is that? Temptations is the testing and strengthening for the purpose of growth in faith and obedience. Temptations is testing and strengthening for the purpose of growth in faithfulness and obedience. He allows them to experience that. And then the next one is sinfulness. Or I think the original language, the way it was originally written, said corruptions. And that's the reality of indwelling sin. That's our sin nature. It's our ability to sin, our sinfulness that we have, that we still carry. But I think one of the most important words is when it says, we are told that God often allows. So God allows this to happen. And since God is not the author of sin, nor the tempter, he does not tempt, this is the previous discussed fact that he permits it to happen through first cause and second cause. And this directly bears how we should look at the trouble that we experience in our own lives. Because it tells us God is the perfect, wise, righteous, and gracious God to his elect. He's doing it out of his love, not out of his anger, or out of his judgment. And when we're facing these troubles of life, this chastisement, we need to keep in mind that there's three purposes or objectives that God is trying to allow. And that's what this paragraph tells us. Why he prunes us. If you remember when I talked about it, Jesus is talking about so you can bear fruit, that you can bear more fruit, and that you can bear much fruit. There was three different things. He says you are pruned so you can bear fruit, more fruit, and much fruit. And we talked about if God is pruning you, if he's allowing you to go through these things, he's seeing the potential that you have to bear fruit, more fruit, and much fruit. And so there's three things that I want to point out that it says that it talks about here, why he does this to his elect. And this is a slide, and it's a fill-in on your sheet. The first is chastisement and humbling. It's for our chastisement and to humble us. So he does this to chastise us for our former sins. It says for their former sins. We may be in sin at the time, sins that we're committing, that we've committed, and make them aware of the hidden strength of the corruption and deceitfulness of our hearts, so that we may be humbled. You see, while our sin is forgiven, it still remains, right? We know it's forgiven, but it still remains in us, and it evidences itself in powerful ways. If you've struggled with sin, you know that, and I believe probably most of us, not all of us, have struggled with sin in one way or another. And our chastisement, it tells us, is the purpose of removing pride, to humble ourselves, to let us know that, hey, we're not in control, really, are we? We can't conquer this on our own. We need him. We need his power. And Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians 12:7-9, and I do not believe I put this on the sheet. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. He calls that thorn, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He was talking about this thing, this chastisement that he was receiving, this thorn in the flesh, was to humble him. And I can see when you study Paul how he might have the tendency to get a little prideful in his life. And he even talks about that when he says, because of the surprising greatness of the revelations, what he had received from God. And the second reason, chastisement and humbling is the first. The second is to draw you to him, to draw his children to him, to lead them to a closer and more consistent dependence on him, to sustain them, is what the confession tells us. And this is to remind us that we must always look to God, always look to heaven for our sustenance and strength, and never rely on our own resources or our own power to try and do something to overcome what God is doing to us. It's to bring us closer to him and to rely on him. And then the third is that we may be more watchful. We may be more watchful. And the confession says to make them more cautious about all future circumstances that may lead to sin. So have you ever had a sin problem and you overcome it and you've developed, I call it an early warning system? Maybe with anger, an early warning system, I'm about to get angry, I need to watch myself. Or maybe even something else. That you've experienced this and now you're more prone to recognize what can bring this sin about. You're more cautious, you're more watchful. And then the final sentence of this, where it says, yet he does this in such a way, because God is altogether holy and righteous, he can neither originate or approve of sin. And in the original, it's punctuated as its own paragraph. And it brings this doctrine into focus is what it's doing. That everything fits within his decree. It is for his glory, and is for the benefit of his people. What he does and how he acts through providence with us is for his glory and for our benefit. And y'all know probably the gold standard verse for this. Romans 8:28. And we know for those who love God, all things, everything God does in his providence works together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. What a promise. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So 5:6, the next big paragraph. This is the mystery of providence, God's ways with his enemies. And it tells us, God, as the righteous judge, sometimes blinds and hardens wicked and ungodly people because of their sin. He withholds grace from them, by which they could have been enlightened in their understanding and had their hearts renewed. Not only that, but sometimes he also takes away the gifts they already had and exposes them to situations that their corrupt natures turn into opportunities for sin. Moreover, he gives them over to their own lusts, the temptations of the world, and the power of Satan, so that they harden themselves in response to the same influences that God uses to soften others. And there's that statement where the way he works is often similar with both, but with different outcomes and with different motives. It says, so they harden themselves in response to the same influences that God uses to soften others. So in the preceding paragraph, like I said, we see how God's providence plays out on the elect, his children. And now we're going to see how providence plays out on the wicked and ungodly. Now, I want to point one thing out. So I said there's two paragraphs here, 5.5 and 5.6. And I want you to note that there's not a paragraph in the middle. There's not a paragraph for those who try and walk in the middle of the road or ride the fence. The Bible's clear. Humanity, according to God, is divided into two categories. Humanity, according to God, is divided into two categories. The people of God and the rest. That's what the Bible tells us. You have his elect, you have those who are saved, And then what this paragraph tells us is you have the wicked and the ungodly. And that's the two categories in humanity. And these enemies of God are given two adjectives. And there's a slide up there, and it's on your page, fill in the blank. And first it says they're wicked. Excuse me. They live in and for sin. So they live in sin and they live for sin. That's what they're programmed for. That's what their nature is. That's what our nature was before we came to Christ. And then the second is the ungodly, because they have no desire to know the one true God on his terms. Those three words are incredibly important. On his terms. Not on our terms. Not on somebody else's terms. Not on somebody's terms that wrote a book that excuses a lot of things that the Bible doesn't say. You have to know God on his terms. That's what they're saying. So he uses this, he tells us what happens here to them, what God does to these wicked and ungodly people. He says he blinds and hardens wicked and ungodly people because of his sin. His providence is dealing with them. He withholds his grace from them, by which they could. If he didn't withhold his grace, they could have been enlightened in their understanding and had their hearts renewed. So this is how he blinds and hardens them, is by withholding his grace from them. And two things result from that. They could have been enlightened in their understanding, but they're not. So they're darkened in their understanding. It's the opposite. They could have had their hearts renewed, but they don't. Their hearts are still stone cold and hard. You see, while in believers, the act of providence assists us in discovering the depths of remaining sin, for the wicked and ungodly, providence does no such thing. Their understanding remains darkened, and their hearts are untouched, because God sometimes blinds and hardens them. Now, what they use here is this word understanding. You know, if you've been listening to me very long, I can't just pass that word by with talking about it a little bit. And then it also talks about could have had their hearts renewed. Understanding and hearts renewed. And on your sheet is 1 Corinthians 2:14 that talks about this. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. And he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. And that's what this is talking about in the London Confession of Faith. It tells us that they do not accept these things. They cannot, because God's grace has been withheld. And when you look at this accept in the Greek, it's to welcome or receive. They do not welcome or receive this. And it's in the present tense, which means this is an action that is ongoing. They can't change it on their own. It's going to continue and continue and continue. And then you get the second half and it says, and he is not able to understand. And that's what they said. They could have been enlightened in their understanding, but what that's basically saying when you take the inverse is they're unable to do it. They're not able to understand. And this understand means the ability or the experience to learn spiritual things. They don't have that ability. It's been withheld from them. And this in 2:14 is in the aorist tense, which means a single completed action in the past. We're born with a sin nature. It's a single completed action in the past. And that provides us and them that we don't have that ability to understand spiritual things. You see, God withholds his grace from the wicked and ungodly so they cannot experience what Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 2:12. This is on your sheet too. He says, now we, talking about those who have come to Christ, have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God. And what happened? That we might understand the things freely given us by God. It is God's grace that gives us that ability to understand the things freely given us by God. But the wicked and the ungodly, they don't get that because God has withheld his grace, and it hardens their hearts. Now, there's a sentence in the London Confession of Faith in this paragraph that talks about gifts. Not only that, but sometimes he also takes away the gifts they already had and exposes them to situations that their corrupt natures turn into opportunities for sin. So through the first cause, he allows them to experience things that allows their corrupt natures to turn to opportunity for sins. And some may think, well, what's this gifts that are taken away? Well, the Puritans used to call gospel minister gifts to people that they were speaking about here, withdrawing ministers' influence around these people. It's a restraining influence. And what this is this is an act of judgment by God. He's removing these gifts, this influence from gospel ministers for them, and they end up pursuing sin all the more, is what they're talking about. So then the next slide is talking about God giving them over to their lusts. He allows them to further experience temptations in three ways, and that's on your sheet there. He gives them over to their own lusts, the temptation of the world, and the power of Satan. He gives them over. Psalm 81, 11, 12, which is also on your sheet. But my people did not listen to my voice. Israel would not submit to me. So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsels. He removed that restraint and allowed them to follow their own counsel. 2 Thessalonians 2, 10 and 11. And with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore God sends them a strong delusion, so that they might believe what is false, in order that they may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And the saddest part of this, the saddest part is that the ungodly, the wicked, harden themselves. So that they harden themselves in response to the same influences that God uses to soften others. And the perfect example of this is Pharaoh, how God dealt with Pharaoh. Now in Exodus 7:3, God states that he will harden Pharaoh's heart so that Pharaoh will not give heed to God's word and will lead his army to destruction. But then when you get to chapters 8 and 9 in Exodus, 6 times, it tells us that Pharaoh hardens his own heart. So how do we resolve this? Is God hardening Pharaoh's heart, or is Pharaoh hardening his heart? Well, the answer is yes. Both are true. It's the doctrine of first and second causes. This is on your sheet. The first cause of Pharaoh's hardening is God's decree to withhold his grace. So we talked about, he withholds his grace, and these things happen. He withholds his grace, executed providentially by upholding, directing, and governing the king's corrupt and self-hardening nature. It's that nature that's already been stamped on him to that end. And then the second cause, man's will, is Pharaoh acting freely according to his wicked nature to commit the sin, with the result that he hardened himself. Pharaoh's actions were his own, and yet they fulfilled the purpose of God. So, yes, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It was the doctrine of first and second causes. Now in closing, and I believe I have enough time and I will read a little bit fast, I just wanted to read the gold standard, the proof text for this whole section. Can anybody guess what it is? And he gave them over. Romans 1, 18 through 32. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them, having been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. God's glory is evident in creation, is what Paul is saying. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creepy things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, for the second time, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those who are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God for the third time, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree, there's the eternal decree, that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but get approval to those who practice them. That last sentence is pretty sobering. You don't have to practice it, you just have to give approval, is what he's saying. But notice 3 times, God gave them up. God gave them up. He removed the restraints and gave them up to their own nature. And it was their own nature that was causing them to sin, not God. God was not the author of sin. So the very last sentence, the mystery of providence in the church, says the providence of God in a general way includes all creatures, but in a special way, it takes care of his church and arranges all things to its goods. And that's very simple. The church is his own. It's a bride of his son, the bride of Christ. What they're saying is he takes special care of his church. And it's usually through us. It's usually through his elect. He takes care of his church. Amen? Aren't you glad? Okay, I know I covered a lot. I hope I didn't confuse anybody. So, are there any questions? Thank you, Adam. Any questions about what I covered? Who's going to open the floodgate? Okay, all right. Nathan. Okay, here we go.
So in 5.6, whenever you were talking about they could have been enlightened in their understanding, would this be like the natural order that it plays out, or they could have been elect? Like, you're not saying that they could have been elect and then God changed his mind.
No.
He'd already decided.
Yes.
And that's just like in real time it playing out.
That is in real time playing out, but I think what the writers are trying to say here is this is why that this is happening to them. If they would have been, they could have been given understanding and had their hearts renewed, which is regeneration. It's Holy Spirit coming in and regenerating it. They would be different, but this didn't happen. So they're going to still continue to follow their sin nature, the nature that they have, because they do not have this. He has withheld his grace from them. How are we saved? By grace through faith, right? And he has not done this. Does that bring a little clarity to it?
Yes, it just caught my attention because
Yeah, that's fine. That's
from
great.
the foundation, they were vessels of wrath, not to be saved. How would they have a chance
They don't.
of enlightenment?
If it has been determined and decreed, they do not have a chance. God cannot change his mind, remember?
Right.
He's immutable. He cannot change his mind. It has been determined. And why has it been determined? I know people wrestle with this all the time. Gosh, Lord. And this is what gets free will. Is this really fair? Well, this goes back to the very first verse I said. His ways are not our ways.
Yeah.
His thoughts are not our thoughts.
I get all
It is for his glory.
that.
Okay.
I just was confused why the
Okay.
author of the confession would say in which they could have been enlightened if
Well, he's not saying that God woulda or shoulda. But before that, he could have decreed it differently, but he didn't.
Okay.
Does that explain a little better? I think maybe. Nathan, do you have anything good? Okay, yeah. I think it was good. They were giving more clarification on why they continue like they did. God could have done this, but since they didn't. You want to? I can get that real quick here if you give me just a second. Make the heart of the people dull, for their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Yeah, that's awesome. That's very good. Any next? Who's
Okay.
Oh, remember you're teaching.
I know.
Won't point that out.
I know. I noticed on the first section here. I'm like, this is some of my thunder you're doing here. I had a question about something that you said. In paragraph 4, you said that, if I'm trying to remember correctly, I don't want to misquote you or anything.
Sure.
So just tell me if I'm wrong. The way I understood it was God did not create us as robots, otherwise he would have created us to love him, and that wouldn't be true love. Did you say that?
Well, what I'm trying to point, we wouldn't have any other option.
Right.
If we could not do, if there was no evil, we would have to obey him, right? I mean, we'd be forced to, because not obeying him is evil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not loving him would be evil, because he would. We're created. One thing is to enjoy him forever, right? Yeah. Well, I think that enjoyment includes love. Go push back.
No. I was just thinking. Are you talking about humanity in general, or because what I'm thinking is like John 6:37 as far as the elect is concerned, right? Every elect person, every individual did not have a chance ever to not be with him ever.
I'm talking about if he would have, in creation, in the decree, if he said, we are going to create a people and they are not going to have the capacity to do evil.
Right. Okay, so you're
even
just
to
talking about
choose,
humanity in general,
yes,
creating humanity. Okay.
Yeah, if he would have not chose to allow any bad or evil into creation at all. Okay. So Adam and them there wouldn't have been any evil. Satan would have not. It's just a hypothetical thing.
Okay.
Okay, am I good?
All right, thanks.
I just want to piggyback off that. With that hypothetical, I think the reason why is so that all of his attributes can be on full display. How can he be fully glorified if all of his attributes are not displayed?
Very good. Oh, and about stealing thunder happens all the time. Sorry, brother. It happened to me. Well, one time, the first sermon I was going to preach, Nathan preached 2 weeks before, and he had about 5 minutes, and I was just going, well, I'm just going to rip that page out of my sermon. And that was my first time. I was in there going, gosh, Nathan, come on. I'm just kidding. But it happens.
I get what you're saying now.
Okay.
Because if there wasn't sin to forgive, how could God show his attribute of grace and mercy?
Right.
And so, okay.
Or justice.
What was that?
Or justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay.
Okay. Next. I've only got 4 more minutes. No. Now, if anybody has a question, please.
Of course, Adam's got to talk.
I think Bobby had a question up in the front not too long ago.
Bobby, didn't you have a question? You don't? Okay. So when we talk about, as Trent mentioned, like God preparing vessels of mercy and God also preparing vessels for destruction in Romans 9, you know.
Yep.
Whenever we talk about that alongside the doctrine of first and second causes, the first cause of Pharaoh's hardening, God's decree to withhold grace, is that first cause within the before the foundations of the world creation of the vessels.
Yes, that was all part of God's decree.
Okay.
And
that's
it's
all.
the first cause within the decree because he decreed everything. He knew everything. He determined that everything would play out the way that it did. And you can get lost in thinking about that. I mean, really, I imagine, oh, anyway. Anybody else? Well, you can't just throw out a verse. Let me see, I've got 3 minutes. It's going to take me about 3 minutes to find that. Genesis 4 what? 6 and 7. It's definitely going to take me 3 minutes to read it. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Right? That's what you're asking. Okay, what's your question concerning that exactly? Well, wait a minute. Where's the... There we go. Sorry.
Be taken now.
We can take it now.
Obviously, you couldn't be offering him salvation for that. But I guess he was offering him some grace that doesn't lead to salvation, but would actually have been better for him, right?
I believe that's right. I believe a lot of times that we think, like when God's changing his mind or doing things like this, God is making a point and teaching a lesson, not only to the person in the Bible, but also the people that are going to follow.
And that also tells us that evil is not just in us, but it's outside of us trying to get in us.
Oh, yeah. That was the three things. Well, the lust is within us, right? But you have the temptations of the world, and you have the power of Satan. I was going to bring this up, and I have a minute. Does anybody have another question? There was a song, I think Justin will remember it, Through It All. Do you remember we sang that? It was a Hillsong song. Of course, Hillsong's not in vogue anymore because of where they've gone. But anyways, the whole point of this is God is not going to let us go through it all. We are not going to be crushed by Satan. We are not going to be tempted and drowning in sin. We have forgiveness. And what we talked about, but several of us do a book study on Monday nights. I really love what we studied this week. We're going through a commentary on Ecclesiastes where it talks about it's better to go to a funeral than a birthing. And he talks about birthing is potential. When a baby is born, that's potential. When somebody dies, that's fulfillment. And that's where everything's being fulfilled. All the promises that God made for us is being fulfilled. And that's the point he's trying to make. And that's the same thing about God not allowing us to go through it all. We know what is going to happen. We know what awaits us. No matter, all of the chastisements or troubles or things, prunings that we have to go through, we know what awaits us, and that's glory. That's glorification, and that's glory. So if nobody else has any questions, we have time for one last one. Okay, let me close in prayer. Father, I just want to thank you.